I'm Andrew Dorland, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's October 9th, 2020. I'm John Swinimer. If you have a comment, criticism, or question, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Andrew Dorland. The podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. And don't forget to check out YouTube. Andrew recently returned to Canada after working as a storyboard artist in Ireland and living in a converted horse stable. Currently at the Raid Studio in Toronto, Andrew often divides his time between doing storyboard work and comic illustration. He has boarded on various animation projects in Toronto and Dublin, while his comic credits of note include South of Yonder for Marcosia and his creator-owned comic Scarabs. We'll be talking about Ballyskillen for this interview. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Andrew Dorland. So, Andrew Dorland, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Perfect, yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Well, I appreciate your time. What I normally do to start off the conversation is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
I've actually listened to the podcast a few times, so I was ahead of the game. I reckon I would know the cover for sure, but I had to look up the number. But it's Amazing Spider-Man 324, so it's Eric Larson plus Todd McFarlane did the cover.
Oh.
And so that was my big thing. I'm going to mess up his name maybe, but it'd be David Michelini.
Mm-hmm.
He was the writer on that. So, I still, it was burned in my brain for sure.
Cool.
Yeah. At the time,
what was it about that caught your fancy?
it would be definitely the art. I think at that time I wasn't even reading them. I'd just read through the pictures.
Sure.
And that kind of thing. And, I think McFarlane's art, everyone kind of goes back and forth with complaining about some of his anatomy and so whatever. But even with that said, I think the art appeal especially was there to pull you into whatever he's drawing. So I still like it. It's great.
Cool. So That leads me to my next question. Who or what inspires you to create today?
Well, I'd say first off, I really got to give the plug out to all my studio members at Raid in Toronto there. So just being around everyone at Raid is a big inspiration every day, just day in and day out. I think outside of that, I'm a huge inspiration from Ryan Gurney as an artist, Ryan Stegman, and definitely storytelling style from David Adja on this like super popular Hawkeye run, but other books by him as well. And that'd be huge. Dampen Ocean as well would be some of his creator-owned stuff I've been reading a lot lately, and really enjoy that kind of stuff.
Cool. I know that you're originally from Ontario, but you were recently in Ireland. You stayed there for a wee bit. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, what's the comic book scene like over there for creators?
It's really good. I was there for about 2 years. It's obviously smaller, just through just European style and also just the demographic, but the intensity of the fans and everything is growing for one thing, and it's really good. So they have like Dublin, I think it's still called Dublin Comic Con. I'd have to double check, but there's two kind of main cons a year, and the Dublin Con is pretty big, and they're getting some pretty big names out there at the moment. And the comic shops themselves are really good at like even if I was living out in the countryside, pretty far away, and I could still make a pull list with them, and they'd mail out books to me because there's really, if you live anywhere but Dublin, I'm sure there's some places and maybe one or two shops in Galway, but besides that, it's not like you can just walk down to your local shop to grab comics. So yeah, they're really into it, and it's growing rapidly, and I'm sure everyone's heard of some big names coming out of there artist-wise and writer-wise. It's actually a really good spot if you want to get into it.
Cool. And that now, being in Ireland, I presume that maybe that's where you got the inspiration for your current project, Ballyskillen. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, it actually started, I'd say, even before that. So my great grandma, we have a really old house on Lake Ontario here, and growing up, there's a bunch of books that she would have had from, I think they're like, I think I had a book right beside me here. It's from 1921, but it's all old Irish legends in the book. So growing up, I'd pull those out of the shelf and just, daydreamed about imagined her reading them and kind of inspired me from there. So I think that's where it started. And then after living in Ireland for 2 years, last 2 years, yeah, I really was able to kind of lock down the story um, more, more real, I guess, having the experience of living there. And then on top of that, my girlfriend is from County Tipperary in Ireland, and she helped a lot with us, just dialogue wise, to try to make it authentic. To go through I wanted it to sound Irish, but not too much that would alienate any North American readers. But yeah, that was pretty much it. So I'd say definitely just all the Irish mythology books I grew up discovering by myself and lost bookshelves around the old house.
Cool. Now, Sam Noir, we talked to in an earlier interview about the book, but for those who might have forgotten, can you sum up Ballyskillen in a short phrase or sentence or two?
Sure, I'd say like the long and short of it would be there's a washed up pub owner, so he's got this pub, but it's not doing so well, and he's kind of a retired rugby player, but he's tricked by an ancient druid, and for things, I guess, reasons I won't reveal, but he's kind of forced to work with the fairies and the druid to gain back his pub. And so there's a town of the fairies are kind of hidden from everyone, hiding out in this town in Ireland, and there's a mysterious monster that's kids are disappearing in the town, and our main hero there, Rory, he's the pub owner, and he's kind of forced to help them out, kind of solve the case. So I've always loved stories that the main character is not really, he's kind of forced into the situation. He's not really your typical. I wouldn't go so far as anti-hero, but he's not your typical rah hero. And
Right.
yeah, so he's on the case, and he's got two really good friends. Johnny, he's a punk rock leprechaun who is one of my favorites because he's actually in love with America, so it's kind of turning that trope on his head. So he's the anti-leprechaun, I guess. And then the other guy is a puka who's a shapeshifter. He turns into a bunch of different animals, and his name's Clive. So he's a giant rabbit most of the time. Mm.
Oh, it sounds pretty interesting, that's for sure. So I mentioned Sam Noir's name before, and you worked with him on this project. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how did that process work out for both of you?
It was actually kind of worked out perfect. So I was new to the Raid studio, and so was Sam. Was there just a little bit before me, actually. And when I arrived, it was right before the whole COVID lockdown stuff happened. So we were kind of forced into a cave, I guess, one way or another together, and met, and we were able to just kind of make it through the lockdown a lot nicer by pouring all of our efforts into this story. So I had this plot kind of roughed out previously to meeting Sam, but I'm admittedly not the greatest at dialogue and all that stuff. So it was a beautiful connection that he was able to take the story and make it even better than I had imagined, for sure.
And you're presenting the art, and he's doing the writing per se.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. We did this, like I said, he kind of took some rough plotting that I had, and then definitely expanded and made it way better. And yeah, and he wrote all the scripts and everything from there. So I just handed it over, and now I'm all art from that point
Very
on.
good. Good.
Yeah.
Now, Sam was telling me that this project is doing something a little bit different. In addition to being a comic book, there's also an augmented reality aspect to it. And I'm wondering if that has influenced the creation process. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it has quite a bit. But I would say first off, the main focus of this was because I have seen other AR kind of augmented reality comics, a few of them kicking around, but the main thing I really wanted the comic to stand alone by itself. That was like the starting point of the whole creation. So if you just had the comic, you can read it, enjoy it, and you don't need to use the app for, to enjoy the comic and make it what it is. But um, we've kind of wove extra elements of the story and the narrative to like expand, make it even. It's kind of like the expanded edition, if you do use the phone, then it will fully animate pages, and you'll get some more insight, maybe some backstories. Working on hiding some stuff in the back of the comic, and I've actually um, just been working on a new element for it that certain pages will have different buttons will now pop up, and when you click on them, it will give you kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons monster manual for whatever creatures on the page. Then you can get kind of their backstory or power level, that kind of thing. Kind of give you some insight into the characters. So there's a bunch of different ways I'm playing it out, but it does definitely uh, influence how I lay out pages a lot more now, because I want to be able to have the animations weave seamlessly into the page.
And I presume you've tested it out on a few people already. I'm wondering what the response has been so far.
Yeah, it's been really good. Kind of like I said, I've seen a lot of other AR apps before, but I haven't seen anyone do what I'm doing on this. I could be wrong. There might be something else out there, but I'm doing a full traditional 2D hand-drawn animation for all the pages. So it's really like it's really turning the comic into a full-fledged cartoon for a lot of the stuff. So I can do a lot of different things. I'm actually using Blender. I don't know what other people may have been using for theirs, but I use Blender so I can actually move the camera in full 3D environment. And I've built the town in a 3D kind of looks like a pop-up picture book, because it's all 2D, but I've drawn the town and laid it all out so I can move a camera around 360. So the camera can bring a panel totally to life and have 360 shots of characters moving and running and the whole 9 yards.
And for those not familiar with Blender, is it the AR creation aspect an easy process after you've done the lighting and positioning of the camera?
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. Sometimes I jump ahead. I'll give just a quick rundown. Yeah, Blender is kind of what I use first for the animation part, and then I think for the most part people would use Unity as the next step to make the app. So yeah, once almost I would say 90% of the work can be done in Blender, and because I'm gonna export that as a video that will be played on top of the panel that you kind of point the camera at. So it's a pretty steep learning curve, I would say, just in general. But there's so many skill sets that kind of fall into place for this. So I really lucked out that I was just on my spare time on weekends, I was kind of messing around with Unity and Blender just for fun, thinking about video games and whatnot. And so I had some familiarity with that already. And then I also do some work on the side as a storyboard artist. So kind of laying out boards for how the animations are going to work within the comic. Kind of just lucked out that all my skill set kind of lend itself perfectly for it.
It's like a perfect storm.
Yeah, it kind of worked very well. Yeah.
Do you see this perhaps as the future of comics? The fact that people want to get more out of let's say the floppy comic. Do you think that this is maybe something that will entice more people to be more creative and add an extra level or layer, so to speak, to their comic book so they can get more out of it when they make their purchase?
Yeah, I think it's a possibility. I kind of to be honest, even when I was creating this, I looked back at, I don't remember when Marvel had the AR kind of stuff early days that came out, and I would say most of the stuff was more of a pain to get your phone out, to even point it at the thing, because I was you're kind of I just want to read the comic. So I'd be really interested to see what happens in the future. That was my whole mindset, was I wanted to make the full cartoon element, because it had to be worthwhile for you to actually just open the app and point it at it. So it had to be something that rewarded the reader. And I could see it doing that in the future. I'm super excited for the project, and I love the AR aspect of it. I also love being able to grab a comic and read it as well, and that's kind of what led me to make sure that this works by itself. So it goes back and forth. I wonder how the big companies would manage labor time for this too, because I am able to do everything, but it is, like I said, I'm hand drawing all the panels. So from a production standpoint, I don't know how they would match that either. But I don't have the crystal ball to see what's going to happen. But hope it all works out anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, we've talked about Ballyskillen quite a bit, but I'm wondering if you have any other projects in the works that you can talk about.
I have some things kicking around. I have an old comic that I did just one issue of, and I have to finish. It's a mini series called Scarabs that I'm going to get back to. But I also have another comic coming out from Mercosia, a UK publisher, and it's called South of Yonder. So that issue 1 is out on Comixology right now. It's a 4-issue miniseries, and then once I'm done, then it'll be collected as a trade, and that will go out. So I'm on issue 3 now, so it shouldn't be too long now before I'm wrap that up and everyone can get their hands on the trade.
Sounds good. So where can people find you online and perhaps on social media, find out what's coming next for Andrew Dorland?
I think the easiest place to go is just www, of course, andrewdorland.com. My handles on everything else are Drew Dorland, so DREW Dorland, DORLAND. So yeah, but just all of those links on all that stuff's just my name. On the website, link to everything else is on there, and I update the front page with whatever big projects going on at the time. So you can find everything you want about Ballyskillen there, or ballyskillen.com as well.
Thanks to Andrew for the chat. You can discover more about Andrew on Instagram at Drew Dorland and online at andrewdorland.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts, and please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube, so please like and subscribe to this video channel. Also, send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com if you have any questions, concerns, or criticism. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2020.